All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. Thanks for tuning in today. This is an educational channel, and we try to check out and turn you on to great theories and discoveries and concepts that you otherwise wouldn't know about, but if you did, they would make a big impact on your life. These are things that have been suppressed from your point of view. You have been discouraged to look into this, sometimes maybe even threatened. They put this stuff on the very margins, so you have to do a lot of digging to get to it. And we've looked at a lot of different stuff, but we've been doing a lot of Bible decodes this year. This is number 305. Mostly on the New Testament. We've been looking into the suppressed theory of the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. That is, that the Romans actually are the true authors of the New Testament, and they did so as a psychological operation against the Jews. We've also looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls and the repression, suppression that has attended their discovery, and what that looks like. We've looked at the Bible from the point of view of mythology and astrology, astronomy/astrology, through entheogens, and we are now kind of looking at the context in which the Bible was written. Who was it written by? When was it written? What were the agendas involved? Why these particular 66 books in the Protestant Bible? Why not this one? Why not that one? Why is this one in there? How do they all fit together? Do they contradict each other? And questions like that. So we're reading 1881 book from Bronson Keeler that is called History of the Bible. And we're getting close to the end of this one, but we are in chapter 8, where we're talking about the formation of the canon. How did the canon come to be, like the books that are in the Bible, and why aren't certain other books in? Now, one point that I think is important that he made in this book is that the church fathers, like St. Ignatius and St. Augustine and Jerome and Origen and Eusebius, they did not view the Bible the way we view it. First of all, they didn't see it. It wasn't canonized, so they just saw separate books. They didn't see a whole compilation of books. But they didn't see these books as being inspired by God or sacrosanct in any way. They, many of them, especially in the earlier period, in the 2nd century, 3rd century, they openly altered the books if they said something that they didn't want it to say, or if they felt like they were improving it. Not only would they alter the books, but they didn't even hide the fact that they were doing it, because that's how everybody saw it. They didn't have to hide the fact. Nowadays, if you did something like that, you would definitely have to hide it. Also, he's delved into a lot of ways of kind of looking and understanding how to discover these various things, like for the what's it called, the transmogrification, or in the Gospels, and how the three Gospels, the three synoptic Gospels, all talk about Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They talk about when Jesus transformed into kind of this light being, and they all describe how John was the witness. John saw this happen. They all three of them said that, I wasn't there, but John saw it. But then when you get to the book of John, he doesn't mention it. So these are just some things that are, um, eye-opening. They don't necessarily point to any type of fraud or any type of, but they do, you know, open your mind to the fact that, okay, the Bible that is coming down to me, that is in front of me right now, um, it's not exactly what I think it is. It has a long history. I can't accept these words of my pastor or my priest telling me this is the Word of God and these are the chosen books and God doesn't want these other books to be involved. I've expressed my personal feeling, where there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but then there's dozens of other Gospels. There's the book of Acts, but there are dozens of other books of Acts. There's dozens of other epistles, and there are even several other books of Revelation. I'm all in favor of just putting them all in one gigantic book and just saying, have at it. Because if I really was a follower of Jesus and worshiped Jesus, I would want to know what these other ones said. Why am I taking some priest or pastor from hundreds of years ago, their word for that these are the ones, these are the only ones you need to know, and these other ones, you can discard, and it's even evil to read those. So, I have my various misgivings about this book, but I think it's somewhat eye-opening just to go back 1,500, 2,000 years, or even 300-400 years, and kind of see what was at stake. It's a lot different than what's at stake now. Like, the Bible has pretty much been static for the last 300, 400 years. Nothing has really changed. But up before that time, things were changing and it was quite fluid. So when we think we have kind of a final product, no, we just have a product that has, been decided on by some powerful people that have varying agendas. Some people might have had, good agendas and some people not. But, that there were a lot of humans behind the scenes pulling strings about what is the Word of God. Okay, let's start here. We're talking about the Westminster, or he says Westminster Assembly in 1647. It's adopted a list which has since been accepted by the Presbyterians of England, Ireland, and America, the Congregationalists of both countries, and in short, by the Protestant, Evangelical, and Orthodox churches with which we come into contact in our daily life in the United States. Keep in mind, this book is 144 years old, so he's talking about what was going on in 1881. It is in the famous Westminster Confession, the one now in our Bibles, and is the same as the Catholic list, except that it rejects the Old Testament Apocrypha. Those are Apocrypha, the spurious works that didn't make the cut for the canon. And there are several Old Testament Apocrypha, like the books of Maccabees, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, that are in the Catholic Bible, but not in the Protestant Bible. The latter was, however, the Old Testament Apocrypha was, however, for a long time printed in an appendix, and some who read this, especially elderly persons, can remember seeing the Apocrypha in the old family Bibles. But in 1827, the British and Foreign Bible Society decided that it would no longer circulate those books. The American Bible Society followed its example, and thus it was that our Bible received its finishing touch, as we have been accustomed to see it. In taking a brief review of the subject, we find that the greater number of the books of the Bible are anonymous. No one knows who wrote them, and no one knows when they were written. They are, in the cases of the most important books, of those most relied on for doctrinal support, compilations from pre-existing records. But who wrote these records and who made the compilations are entirely unknown. When the books of the Old Testament came into use, they were not considered inspired. That idea was an afterthought. And the Christian church places a higher value on some of the books than the original possessors or than Jesus himself did. In the same manner, when the books of the New Testament came into use, they were not considered inspired or the Word of God either. Many Gospels, epistles, and revelations, not now in use, were read in the churches in the early centuries. About the close of the 2nd century or the beginning of the 3rd, when the Catholic Church was forming, a source of authority for appeal in case of dispute over new doctrines was necessary, and the Fathers instituted the theory that certain books were inspired. But the books which they said were divine were not always the same books which we have now. They declared many books to be inspired which we do not think to be, and they ignored and rejected many books which have since been invested with divine honors. The contentions of the sects made it impossible for the new church to unite on the Gospels which had been first in use, and they were therefore discarded, and our present 4 Gospels were substituted. To give them greater authority, the names of apostles who had been with Jesus were forged to them, literary forgery in those days not being considered a crime. The Fathers, in asserting that the books were inspired, were guided not by critical ability, but by ignorance and superstition. Instead of being great scholars, they were extremely credulous and in general very inferior intellectually. After much controversy, it became apparent that they could not agree as to what books should form the Bible, and councils took the matter in hand, and for nearly 12 centuries they discussed it. And finally, the Roman Catholic Church and the Council of Trent in 1546, and the Greek Church in the Council of Constantinople. I thought that was, I don't know the date of that. Decided once for all what the list should be for their adherents, and the Westminster Assembly gave the English-speaking Protestants their catalog. The Bible as we have it today is hardly more than 3 centuries old. Now, there we go. That is the end of the book. That's rather surprising. I didn't really know that we were already done. Okay, now, what I can discuss a little bit is where we're going to go from here. I think tomorrow we're going to start reading some notes, kind of going back into the Roman origins hypothesis, because I believe it has great explanatory power. And if you can just get over the initial shock, you'll recognize that it is definitely on the right track. And it totally dovetails with, a truther point of view. We have begun to recognize that the 20th century is filled with psychological operations. That things happened in the 20th century that are not the way that they were presented to us. The Kennedy assassination, the Murrah building in Oklahoma City bombing, the Waco affair in around the same time, 1993 or so, 9/11. All of these events did not, the moon landing, all of these events did not happen the way that we were told that they happened. There was a psychological operation in play where, for some reason, somebody had an agenda and that wanted us to think a certain way about a certain thing, but that is not how it really happened. And a lot of digging has convinced millions of people that that is true. And now some of these psychological operations look ridiculous to anybody who's kind of done the research, and once you start to see the patterns, you start to be able to recognize what a psychological operation looks like. You can see the various patterns, and you can see the agendas, and you can kind of decode what was happening. Well, unfortunately, most truthers haven't taken their digging beyond the 20th century. A few have gone back to the 19th and maybe even the 18th century with the formation of the Illuminati. But few have gone all the way back to biblical times and recognized that events were just one. The events that have been documented are generally just one psychological operation after another. And so we're going to look at some of the work of Roman Piso, and he's a character that I don't know if that's his real name, but he has a lot of opinions that I strongly disagree with, especially about the modern world. But his general thesis, which he calls the new classical scholarship, and he's trying to kind of get other scholars on board with the new classical scholarship, which starts with the basic premise that there has been a permanent oligarchy in the world. The world has been composed of two groups of people: the normal people and the royals, the kings and queens and their family members and their cousins and other royal other royalty, including other high-ranking officials, princes and dukes and counts and all of these people that are kind of in the court of the king or queen. And these people have controlled society from day one, and they have controlled society by controlling the information that we receive. The common people, the other 99.9%. And they have always written all the books. All of the learning that is involved in ancient times was by these royals. And in many cases, they wanted to deceive you into thinking that there were all kinds of different people writing books. But it was always from the royals. And so the royals quite often took alias names or pen names or pseudonyms, fake names, they wrote under many different names. So there might just be one author, but he might write under 10 names to give you the impression that there are 10 separate authors, and that, all kinds of people are writing books now. Our whole curriculum isn't being written by 2 or 3 different people. It's being written by 30 or 50 different people, and that they're not all having an agenda. They are trying to search for the truth, and this can be seen in great relief when you look at the Bible and the Roman origins hypothesis. Roman Piso was one of a number of scholars who has independently determined that the New Testament was written by Josephus. Josephus or Josephus is known by Christians as one of the first and most prominent secular historian to actually corroborate the existence of Jesus. So Christians use Josephus when they are hit with the criticism that maybe an atheist would give a Christian, to say that there's no evidence for the existence of Jesus. What is your evidence for his they'll say Jesus never existed. What's your evidence? And your Christian will say, well, what about the work of Josephus? Josephus, in his book called Antiquities of the Jews, he talks about this character named Jesus and discusses him in a paragraph in one of his books. Well, your average atheist might be able to poke some holes into that. They might say, well, Josephus was writing in a much later period. The events that are portrayed in the Gospels were supposed to have happened in the late 20s or early 30s AD. And Josephus's book, Antiquities of the Jews, that is from the 90s. So it is from a good 60 years later. Josephus himself was said to have been born in 37 AD. So he never shared the planet with Jesus. He was never on the same planet as Jesus. Died at least 3 or 4 years before Josephus was even born. So that doesn't make him, a primary source. He's going on some type of hearsay evidence as well. Now, your Christian might say, oh, well, but he's basing it on other people who were present there, like maybe his father or his mother, older people that he talked to. So at least, it's grounded in historical, they say that it takes several generations before, legend sets in, before people start exaggerating the stories, although if you play the telephone game, you can see that it certainly doesn't take several centuries or several generations for stories to get exaggerated and twisted and bent out of shape. Just whisper in the person's ear next to you and wait till it goes all the way around the circle and comes back to you, and it's nothing even close to what you said to the person in the first place. But even if that's true, the fact of the matter is that even according to his own autobiography, Josephus was a member of the Roman royal court of the Flavian dynasty of Caesars. He was, the Flavian dynasty of Caesars includes Emperor Vespasian and his 2 sons, Emperors Titus and Domitian. and they were in charge of the Roman Empire from 69 until 96 AD. Josephus is known as Flavius Josephus. He's a member of the Flavians, and Flavian basically means blonde or golden. And so when you recognize that the person that corroborated the existence of Jesus is one of the Roman royals, well, then that makes complete sense with the Roman origins hypothesis. Yeah, of course he said that Jesus existed, because he's in on the psychological operation. He's in on the hoax. And then when you look at all of the other early authors from within 100 years of the time that Jesus was said to have lived that also corroborate the existence of Jesus, well, then you have Tacitus, and you have Suetonius, and you have Pliny the Younger, and you have the Emperor Trajan. All of them are Roman royals. They are all members of the Roman royal court. Trajan himself was an emperor. Pliny almost was an emperor, and he was an in-tight family member with the Flavians, in particular the Piso cousins of the Flavians. Tacitus was also a member of this court, as was Suetonius. Suetonius, according to Roman Piso, was also one of the emperors. He was Emperor Antoninus Pius, who was in charge of the Roman Empire from 137 until 161 AD. And he was the author of a passage that talks about Chrestus, this character that inspired a lot of people in Judea in times of the past. So all of these Romans that are cited by Christians as evidence for the existence of Jesus are washed away by the Roman origins hypothesis. There are many other things that are also washed away by the Roman origins hypothesis. The existence of Satan. There is no Satan in the Old Testament. No Satan the way that we think of Satan as an all-powerful, kind of opponent of God, the arch-enemy of God or the arch-enemy of Jesus. Satan appears in the Old Testament a handful of times, but in each occasion, Satan is a human, and is just basically means an adversary or an opponent, an obstacle, not some type of supernatural. That comes with the Romans and their writing of the New Testament. And then it gets exacerbated badly over time, especially with books such as Dante's Divine Comedy and Milton's Paradise Lost, but then particularly in the 20th century with Hollywood, the cinema, and cartoons and other shows that all portray portray Satan as this red, being with a pitchfork or whatever that is, kind of got magical powers. That's all Roman, of Roman origin. So we're going to look at, and so Roman Piso's major point of view is that all of the ancient books, whether it is the Bible or whether it is the works of Josephus or whether it is, the work of Aristotle or any number, Plutarch, or any number of other Roman, Roman, sometimes Greek, and other classical authors, that they all come from a small group of scholars, of authors, um, that are royals, particularly Roman royals. And in particular, this character named Arius Piso, who Roman Piso claims to be a descendant of. And he attributes all kinds of stuff to, and the way that he does it, and his sidekick, although they determined this independently, but they began to work together at a certain point, was this guy named Abelard Reuchlin, and he's got a pamphlet, booklet out. It's called The True Authorship of the New Testament, but that he also shows that Arius Piso wrote all kinds of other stuff. He wrote as Claudius Ptolemy, the great astronomer, and Aristotle, and a lot of Apollonius of Tyana, Nicomachus of Gerasa, that he was one of the great early mathematicians, Hero of Alexandria, who was one of the great inventors, and Hero of Alexandria also actually invented a lot of things that were used in the church. And so where Arius Piso and his family wrote the New Testament, they wrote the books really as a play or as a drama to be performed in front of people. Keep in mind that most people didn't know how to read at this time. Now, you also should know that these Gospels are written in Greek. Greek was a relatively rare language in Judea. In Judea, the people that Jesus would have been speaking in Aramaic, his disciples would have been also, most of them, if not all of them, would have been illiterate, and even if they did write, it would have been Aramaic, not Greek. There was some Greek in Judea, but it was primarily for the very upper elite. Now, in Rome, Greek was the language of the common people, and Latin was an additional language that the royals possessed. So a lot of the royals were bilingual in both Greek and Latin. So this is all just kind of background to getting into this work of Roman Piso. He's got on one of these websites, he's got probably nearly 200 articles on various aspects of all of this.